I want to do two things at the beginning of the week. And the first of his many gracious acknowledgments, Owsley said that at least vis-a-vis this community, Fetzer was a bit below the radar. So I want to come up above the radar and share with you briefly a little bit about who we are and why we're so excited about what's happening here. And then I want to shift gears and say we're not only a community, but we're part of a movement. And we're looking ahead to celebrating the first 25 years of the Festival of Faith, but it's critical that we look beyond to say, what's the next 25 years? And so I just want to share in the second half of my remarks some thoughts that have come up to me that I just want to plant as seeds for thought. So Fetzer, we think we're a special place. There's one respect in which I know we're absolutely unique. We are the only foundation, I'd even say in the world, that has a World Series trophy in our lobby, okay? Which is an opening to say a little bit about John Fetzer. Born in 1901, died in 1991, so he lived in every decade of the 20th century. If you knew him publicly, you would have known him as a very hard-driving and successful entrepreneur, pioneer in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in the early days of radio and television. And then in 1958, he bought the Detroit Tigers and owned them for about 30 years and was a pioneer in the integration of broadcasting and professional sports. But if you'd known him privately and intimately, you would know that his lifelong passion, consuming passion, was the spiritual journey and inner transformation, not only his own, but humanity's. So as he came to the end of his life, he felt a growing conviction that he was to commit his resources to endow a community, not an organization, but a community that could do its small part in building a movement that could support humanity in the next big step in our shared spiritual journey. And so that's who Fetzer is. And the beautiful thing about John Fetzer is he thought that as a long-term work, and he didn't know what that meant. So rather than being highly prescriptive, he said, listen for the ring of truth. And there you, the community, will discover the final work of the foundation. The only thing I'm sure of is that its summary will be unconditional love. How's that for a generosity of spirit? So needless to say, that's a daunting challenge to live into. We've been, as a community, living into it intensively now for almost 30 years. Several milestones. About 10 years after his death, our board went on retreat and said, let's see if we can distill in a few words what we think is the essence of that vision. And they came up with a beautiful guiding purpose statement that is our North Star. And I'll share it with you. It's our purpose: to awaken into and serve spirit, capital S, for the transformation of self and society, based on the principles of the wholeness of reality, freedom of spirit, and unconditional love, and the integration of the inner life of mind and spirit with the outer life of action and service. That gets me up every morning, just thinking, wow, what a blessing. And, you know, I'm guessing that that's a guiding purpose that pretty much a lot of you all can buy into. Can't tell you everything we do. Apropos the subject of this symposium, spirituality and science, the convergence of spirituality and science, tremendously important to John Fetzer. It manifests now in our work in one way, supporting scientists. We have an intensive program in quantum physics and consciousness that tries to open up our thinking about the fundamental nature of reality. We also support scientists like Richie and Lisa and Cliff Sarin, who you heard yesterday, on the search for scientific insights into human flourishing, to put it broadly. And that's tremendously important. But I'd also like to say we drop down to an even deeper level about, and think about the challenge of bringing the scientific and spiritual ways of knowing into right relationship. We feel like as human beings, our most fundamental obligation is to try to tell the deepest and truest story about the nature of reality that we can, and then to bring our lives into our alignment with our understanding of reality. And so we have to use all the tools at our disposal, and those include our scientific and rational ways of knowing, but also our spiritual way of knowing. And our overall take is that that's gotten way out of balance, that in the post-Enlightenment West, we've privileged science and reason and lost the confidence of our spiritual intuitions, much to our detriment. Science, of course, has yielded tremendous benefits, but in the process, we've lost our sense of the sacredness of things. And so one way I focus that point is that thanks to science, we have become tremendously more powerful as a species, but we haven't become correspondingly more virtuous or wise or loving. And that's a story that ends badly because we will use that tremendous power destructively. So the great challenge for our generation is to inspire and support the growth of a powerful global movement that can bring that into balance by giving the world back the confidence of our spiritual nature, our innate goodness. And so we think in terms of doing our part to inspire and support that global movement. We think a lot about the need for the shared sacred story of humanity in the 21st century. It's a story that has to go all the way to the ground ontologically, and we think the exciting thing about what's happening in science is that there's tremendous opening now to think beyond the clockwork determinist universe that when you think about it doesn't have room for deep meaning, purpose, free will, or value, to a much more open possibility of consciousness as a fundamental constituent of reality, of meaning infused in the universe. I'd love to talk more about that. That indeed could be a whole festival of faith. But let me shift gears and offer some three observations about ways in which perhaps we as a community and a movement could go even further beyond this remarkable achievement of the last 25 years. And I want to build on our experience or draw from our experience at Fetzer and with real humility, but to share the thought that maybe we have learned some lessons the hard way that could benefit. The first is how do we find and articulate that spiritual common ground? I mentioned our guiding purpose, awakening into and serving spirit for the transformation of self and society. Our board developed that back around 2000, but it lived on the margins of our community until the middle of 2013 when we said, if we're serious about that as our guiding purpose, we got to put it in the middle of our life as a community. So for the last 5.5 years, we've been gathering our staff of 60 every Tuesday morning for 3 hours to kind of live into the challenge of how do you do spirituality across difference? Because we're very diverse on lots of dimensions, including spiritual path. And I'll tell you, the first thing that happened when we started that is fear rushed into the middle of the circle because people were saying, are you going to tell me what I have to believe about spirit? Are you going to judge whether I'm spiritual enough, whether my practice is deep enough? And we realized that we have to engage each other with the deepest humility and respect and love and gentleness and also care about our language. Just a couple of things we ran into. Spirit, it's a word that's very congenial to me from the Christian tradition, but our Buddhist colleagues said, it has theistic overtones. We're not quite sure it works for us. From the other side, was very congenial for them to talk about non-dual consciousness. And the Christians said, but no, the Trinity is very important for us, and that's the distinctness of persons is very important. And so I would just encourage us as a community to deepen that sense of humility and deep listening. Second thing I'd say is that if this global movement is going to be as big and as powerful as it needs to be, we need more people here. And particularly, I would say, we need to think about the importance of drawing into this interfaith conversation the more theologically conservative members of all of our traditions. This interfaith dialogue comes most naturally to folks that are in the spirit of many paths up one mountain. But many of the folks, people of deep faith, compassion, love, feel compelled to make some form of exclusivist claim for their tradition. We often pull back from them. But I would submit that the real challenge is to find a way to make common cause with them over against the nihilistic pull of so much of modern culture to affirm the deep sacredness of things and to then share our experiences humbly. And the third and last seed I'd like to plant is one that is near and dear to me as a result of the work we've been doing since early 2016 under the flag of healing the heart of American democracy. And what I'll say there is we talked inappropriately about the urgency of the climate change problem. And the appeal was made multiple times that we need to make that our top priority. And I understand that. But I want to suggest for us as Americans, and this is true in many other places around the world, there's a prior challenge that we cannot skip over. And that is recognizing that our common life is breaking down. We have become so good at dehumanizing and even demonizing folks that we disagree with, that our common life is becoming polarized and toxic to a point that our very free society is at threat. And the truly sad thing, I think, for those of us in this room is that on too many days our faith communities have showed up as part of that polarizing dynamic. And why do I say that? In part because it's tearing us apart, but in part because it's a huge opportunity for those of us who believe in the profound importance of inner transformation. Because what I'm finding is that millions and millions of people are realizing that this is an existential threat, that there's no political solution, that it has to be addressed at the heart level. That is to say, they're ready for the spiritual conversation. And we need to step into that moment. And it's a real challenge because we have done an incredibly good job in this country with what some have described as the big sort, sorting ourselves out into ideologically homogeneous communities. And I want to humbly suggest that we've done it here. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I have great confidence that this community leans profoundly in the liberal direction. And we bring with that profound unconscious bias, and I will hazard to say, a dangerous degree of spiritual and intellectual arrogance. And if that shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. But I run into it over and over, and I realize that I am at profound risk. We at Fetzer have realized there's a new dimension of diversity that we have to engage as a community, and that's ideological diversity. Fetzer has never been a place for an ideological conservative to be open about their views. So we're engaged in partnerships now with the Southern Baptist Convention, with the Charles Koch Institute, and I'll tell you what we are finding is that this same pull is working on that side as well, realizing that this hyper-partisan death spiral we're in just can't continue. And what I'm finding is that when we step out courageously and humbly, we're met with equal courage and humility. So I have a vision of a bigger tent for this festival, bigger theologically and also bigger ideologically, so we can become the place where the really essential work of reconciliation and bridging and re-sanctifying the world can happen. And that, I think, is an inspiring vision. So I'll leave that with all of us to chew on. Thank you.